In the early 80s, Middle America experienced tragedies that no parent could imagine, until it happened for the first time. Newspaper boys were disappearing from the streets. They would step out into the dark of the early morning hours to deliver the daily news to their neighborhoods, and some of them did not return. It started in Iowa, and then it moved to Nebraska. Kids were plucked off the street, just a few steps into their routes, and some have vanished forever. The first boy gone was in West Des Moines, Iowa. The papers he carried read, Des Moines Sunday Register, the newspaper Iowa depends upon. September 5, 1982. $1 for a single copy, 85 cents by motor route, and 80 cents by carrier. The top story headline read, Good news of Iowa humanity emerged in tragedies of summer. The day's weather forecasted on the front page, partly cloudy, with a 30% chance of showers and thunderstorms in the afternoon. Highs 80 to 85 degrees, but none of that mattered because the boy was gone before sunrise, vanished. This is True Crime Garage, and this is our look at the missing Paperboys, Chapter 1, Johnny Gosch.
We are going back in time to the 18th of September, 1983. This is Bellevue, Nebraska. Bellevue, Nebraska is just outside of and just south of Omaha, Nebraska, which is right on the state line of Nebraska and Iowa. September 18th, 1983 was in fact a Sunday. Please note that all three, the location, the month, and the day of the week, and more importantly, the fourth item here, Captain, the scenario regarding this story, are all very key ingredients to the emergency response and law enforcement officers responding to this call for help that caused them to have great concern. And they all agree this is very, very strange, very, very scary stuff right off the rip. So this is from Peter Klismet's book. Now, we've recommended his book before in our recommended segment here in the garage. The book title is FBI Diary, Profiles in Evil. And this portion of his book reads, 13-year-old Danny Joe Eberly got up early as he always did and headed down to a nearby convenience store to pick up his supply of 70 Sunday newspapers to go out and deliver them. He rolled the papers, put the entire load in the delivery bag on his bicycle, and took off on his route. But he only made it 3 stops on this route. When some people on the route didn't get their newspapers at the usual time, they were on the phone to Danny's parents, calling his home phone number. Puzzled by the number of phone calls, his parents headed out on the route, eventually finding Danny's bike inside the gate of a fence around a dentist's home. Folded newspapers were inside the delivery bag. But Danny Joe was nowhere to be found. There were no signs of a struggle. His parents drove around to see if they could find him, but could not. And immediately afterward called the Bellevue Police Department. Police began searching for the boy right away, systematically talking to people in the area, but no one had seen anything, including Danny Joe himself. The search continued for the entire day, with officers checking every building in the area and searching around houses. More neighbors were interviewed, but no one had seen Danny Joe with anyone. He had simply vanished. And as Peter Klismet writes, much like Johnny Gosch did a year before. And the parallels, he says, were eerily similar. No clues were found despite a search by over 100 townspeople and officers. The day became evening, and when darkness fell, the search was put on hold and began first thing the next morning. Yet again, the search teams fanned out with guidance and organization from law enforcement. The sheriff's department was involved, and the Bellevue police chief contacted the local FBI office in Omaha, Nebraska. Agents were immediately assigned to help with the search and investigation into the boy's disappearance. There were no indications of problems at home that could have made him decide to run away. To the contrary, he was conscientious about getting up, delivering his papers, and getting himself to school every morning. There were no problems at school. No one could understand how he could mysteriously disappear. So where this call goes here, Captain, we have FBI is going to get involved very quickly in the disappearance of Danny Joe Eberly from Bellevue, Nebraska. Newspaper boy out on his route, doesn't come home. It appears he made it to 3 of the stops, delivering 3 newspapers, and then something must have occurred after that 3rd delivery, and now the boy is gone. The FBI, we have Special Agent in Charge Herb Hawkins at the local field office here, and we have Assistant Special Agent in Charge John Evans from the Omaha, Nebraska field office. So they are coordinating with the Bellevue Police Department and the Sarpy County Sheriff's Office. Herb Hawkins and John Evans get a local agent, Peter Klismet Jr., who we've already mentioned his name a couple times. I believe he is out of neighboring state Iowa at this time. They get him involved, and they also make a call to Quantico to bring in one of the big guns, one of the original mine hunters, Robert Ressler. On these initial phone calls, all of the agents discussed, could this be a link? Could this be a continuation of the case that made national headlines just 130 miles to the east and almost exactly 1 year prior about another missing paperboy, 12-year-old Johnny Gosch?
Well, I think this hit home to a lot of people because at that time, your paperboy delivering your daily paper is a part of your daily life. So this affected a lot of individuals.
For many, it's the start of each day, the start of that daily life. And
absolutely.
To have something go so wrong so quickly in the day is jarring. And then we know, as this story stands today, very, very haunting, very mysterious. So let's circle back here and get into the details, because I know we've talked about it many times here in the garage, but everybody listening today may not be fully up to speed on the Johnny Gosch portion of this story. And again, the FBI agents that get involved in this missing paperboy case, immediately they have to be thinking about Johnny Gosch. Again, it's just 130 miles away. It took place about 1 year prior. In today's trailer, we talked about the newspaper headline and details that were on the front page of the Des Moines Register newspaper, the very papers that Johnny Gosch was out delivering on the day he went missing.
Right.
Now, the next day, the headline was Police Hunt Missing West Des Moines Boy, with an article featuring a school picture of the missing youngster, Johnny Gosch. And this true crime story breaks down as such. Before dawn on September 5th, 1982, the quiet routines of a West Des Moines, Iowa neighborhood were already stirring. Johnny Gosch, a 12-year-old Des Moines Register paperboy, born November 12th, 1969, got up early to begin his Sunday morning routine, which was delivering the Sunday morning paper, going on his paper route. In the Gosch home, this was usually a familiar ritual. Johnny often would get his father up, wake him up. John Gosch is his father, so the two of them could go on the route together. But on September 5th, 1982, Johnny went out alone. He wasn't entirely by himself, though. That morning, he took the family's dog, This is a small miniature dachshund. Dog's name is Gretchen. So Gretchen goes with him as he headed out into the pre-dawn darkness of West Des Moines.
Well, let me just, for people that are not familiar with Paperboys, because in the 70s, 80s, 90s, it was commonplace. So you'd have a kid that was local to the route. The route would be normally a couple blocks, a section of housing close to that individual's location or close to their house. The papers would be delivered in a stack. The newspaper boy would then wake up, normally before school. They would get the papers, they would roll them or bag them, and then they would head out and deliver them. Now, most of the time, the paper boys were, I would say, early teenagers to high school students.
Well, see, that's interesting that you say that because that was our experience. We delivered newspapers in the 90s, and I think that these stories are why in the 90s that the paper boys were a little older than they were in the 80s.
Right.
And as you said, that paper route, very important for folks to know that was either very near the delivery boy's home or the delivery boy's home was part of that route. And Sunday is always your biggest delivery day. I recall my route, damn near every house on the route received a Sunday paper. It was about half or maybe a third received the paper daily.
Yeah. And with the Sunday papers, they normally had ads. So they would be heavier papers. But a typical day, they'd wake up, collect the papers that were delivered to them. They'd have to roll them or bag them, and then they would deliver them. Now, they might deliver them by themselves, or they might have a parent that helps them. And sometimes that would depend on the weather.
Exactly. And note that in both of these cases that we've mentioned here with these two paper boys, this is both occurring on a Sunday. So the busy day for these delivery boys and the day that the paper boys would be out the longest amount of time on their route as well.
Right. And so if they're delivering the papers by themselves, they become very vulnerable.
This next part, I want to be clear here. Some descriptions say white sweatshirt. The majority of them say white t-shirt. This is a description of what Johnny Gosch was wearing when he set out that day to deliver the papers. Now, Johnny Gosch is on foot, where Danny Joe Eberly was on his bicycle.
Right.
Johnny wore clothes described in later summaries as a white t-shirt or white sweatshirt with Kim's Academy on the back. He was also wearing warm-up pants and blue rubber flip-flops, and he carried the standard yellow newspaper delivery bag used by the local carriers. And if you go back on message boards or go through comments, people that lived in the area that have continued to follow the Johnny Gosch case, they say that there's a picture of a delivery bag and everybody's comments are the same. All of the kids, all the delivery boys wore those same delivery bags. They were used to seeing that color, that delivery bag. His route began near the area later associated with what would be suspected as the abduction site or near the abduction site. So this is around 42nd Street and Marcourt Lane in West Des Moines. Like other carriers, Johnny first needed to collect his newspapers. So there's a drop-off spot. Other Des Moines Register paper carriers would later say that they saw him at the paper drop-off picking up his papers.
Right.
Those sightings are corroborated by multiple witnesses. These became the last widely verified moments of Johnny Gosch's morning. Not long after, something happened that several people would remember in fragments and uneasy impressions. Another paper boy, he's much later identified by the single name of Mike. I don't know if that's his real name or if that's how they chose to identify him. Early on in this case, Captain, a lot of the paper boys that had comments or said that they may have seen something were not identified to the public by name.
Yeah, because law enforcement was afraid that they would be targeted.
Exactly. This paper boy named Mike later reported that he saw Johnny talking with a stocky man who was near a blue two-tone car. Now, a second witness, his name, John Rossi, also saw a man in a blue car speaking with Johnny and felt that something about it didn't sit right. Rossi recalled that Johnny told him the man was asking for directions, and Johnny asked Rossi to help. Rossi tried to do what he could in the moment. He looked at the license plate, but when the situation passed, he found that he could not recall the plate number. Later, he would describe the frustration of that gap, how he kept hoping the numbers would suddenly return to him. He says, quote, as distinctly as night and day, end quote, but they never did.
Right.
Rossi eventually underwent hypnosis and reported some plate details to police, including that the plate he believed was to be an Iowa license plate from Warren County. So as Johnny moved on, walking roughly 1 block north toward where his route began, another paperboy noticed something else. Johnny appeared to be followed by another man. Around that same time, a neighbor later described hearing a door slam, seeing a silver Ford Fairmont speed away northward from the area where Johnny's wagon would later be found. So that wagon is what he used to carry the papers. And as said, this would be his big day. He's got his bag over his shoulders, and he's got his wagon that he's pulling behind him. That wagon, Johnny Gosch's wagon, would become one of the most haunting physical anchors in this case.
And we know because we were both paper boys, but I didn't remember, or I don't remember seeing other paper boys out when I was delivering. Sometimes one of the people on your routes might open up the door as you're going to deliver the paper on their porch, but you also didn't really see cars on the road because you're delivering the papers before work and before school.
Yeah, you would often during the week it would be a little more typical that you might see somebody out or somebody in their front yard or going out to their vehicle. But you're absolutely right. 95% of the time, first off, circle back to something else you said. I never saw another delivery boy. And we did this, we had a route for years. I do recall almost every day seeing the drop off, the person that would drop off the bundles of newspapers, because you would wait for them to arrive so you could start. You couldn't start until you received that bundle. So that person, that vehicle, you would typically see, I would anyway, every single day.
Yeah.
And at most during the week, most days, the only thing I would encounter would be a dog that would decide to chase you temporarily, or again, maybe somebody walking out to get in their vehicle to go into work early. So it's usually kind of the dead of the morning, for lack of a better term. Here, his route is interesting, and I'm guessing it's a much more heavily populated area. You have paper carriers meeting in a central location that morning to receive their paper bundles. And they're all kind of in the same space before they part ways and go to start their routes. That would seemingly be helpful in the Johnny Gosch case, that we have some of these eyewitnesses and then potential ear witness. But I will say this, Captain, that the timeline of events and witness reports of that morning, they seem a little scattered. Some of them overlap, and some of them are not quite clear on the order of what took place that morning.
Well, eyewitnesses normally have the best intentions, but if you ask me what I ate for breakfast yesterday, I couldn't tell you. One of the things that I think helps law enforcement in these cases is we should have an idea of when the papers were dropped off to the paper boy for him to then either wrap the papers or roll the papers up. And so at least we have a starting point in these timelines.
Yes, we have a generalization of some of these times. And then the car information is helpful. It doesn't seem to produce any leads, but I think it helps when talking about theories and speculation in the Johnny Gosch case. So just like in the Danny Joe Eberly case that we referenced earlier, As the morning continues, Johnny's parents, the Gosches, they begin receiving phone calls from customers along Johnny's route. People are complaining that their newspapers had not been delivered. And this is what's going to kick things into action. Johnny's father went out for a quick search of the surrounding neighborhood. So the route is nearby. The streets are familiar to the father, obviously, and yet within minutes, he found something that made the situation unmistakably wrong. 2 blocks from their home, John Gosch found Johnny's little red wagon sitting abandoned. It was not empty. It's still full of newspapers.
Not a good sign.
The Des Moines Sunday Register that had never made it to the porches that Johnny was to deliver them to. So this finding here, Captain, tells a simple story with terrible implications. That Johnny had made it out there, started his route, and something caused him to quit mid-route after finishing just a couple of deliveries. He had been interrupted by something, but I want to point out, almost immediately once he starts his route. I think that could be key here in this disappearance case.
Yeah, I think it shortens the time frame. And then obviously, that'd be my luck. Go out to get the paper. It's not there. I call to complain, make an ass of myself, just to find out that my paper boy has gone missing.
Johnny's parents, John and Noreen Gosch, they contacted the West Des Moines Police Department and reported their son missing. In later public statements, his mother, Noreen, would be sharply critical of what she saw as a slow initial response time by police. She described a policy at the time that a child could not be classified as a missing person until 72 hours had passed. And by her account, police did not arrive to take their report for 45 minutes. A stretch of time that in a case like this is going to feel like a lifetime to those involved. Now, early on, we have like police assumptions that seem very shifty in the Johnny Gosch case. You review some articles and it sounds like he was initially viewed as a possible runaway. Other articles where police or law enforcement members are saying that, oh no, we don't believe that he's a runaway. It's simply a missing persons case.
Right.
Others saying we have to wonder if he's been abducted or it could be a kidnapping, but it's just a missing persons case. So it's really all over the map as to what they thought took place right out the gate.
Well, my problem with this is, to me, this is stupidity, because if we have a missing child that didn't collect the papers, like I said, to roll them or bag them, no effort to deliver the papers, then I think you could say, hey, maybe he ran away. But when you have a wagon full of papers and no sign of this paper boy, it makes zero sense. Oh, I delivered 3 papers and then I decided that I'm going to run away. It's stupidity, in my opinion.
Well, and given his age, boys will be boys. And I think that there was some thought by some, not many, that this could just simply be a prank that Johnny was pulling on people. But
right.
Very quickly, I believe this is the next day or within 48 hours, the district circulation manager, his name is Lou Cook, he said, and this is something that Johnny's friends had said as well, like, we don't think he would have pulled a prank because if he did, it wouldn't involve the newspaper or his paper route. And okay, so that's kids saying that, but Lou Cook, the circulation manager, had this to say. He says, this disappearance didn't fit the image of Johnny Gosch, of the kid that he knew. He said Johnny didn't seem to him to be the type of kid that would just wander off. He says Johnny had, quote, never before not delivered his route, end quote. And Cook goes on to say he was responsible with a strong service record. And this is something that the carriers pointed out, as well as the manager, that if carriers missed a delivery, if there was a paper that was not delivered on a Sunday, the carriers themselves were charged 75 cents per paper that was not delivered, meaning Johnny Gosch, if he were to pull a prank, it would have cost him $27.75.
Right.
And as logic went, no one thought a prank would be worth that to a boy 12 years old who is known to be responsible and hardworking.
All right, we are back. Cheers, mates. Tall cans in the air. Make sure you tip your newspaper boy.
That's right. I don't know that they exist anymore.
Simpler times, my friend.
Yeah, we. You want to watch something interesting? Talk to the young person working the customer service desk and ask them, "Do you sell newspapers?" And then just see how that plays out. So let's get into this timeline the best we can. So the Des Moines Register, the same paper that our missing boy was delivering, would later document the first frantic hours and type that captured both urgency and uncertainty regarding the missing boy. The paper described how another carrier reported seeing Johnny talking with a man along the route and how authorities were reluctant to call it a kidnapping right away, publicly labeling it, at least initially, as a missing person incident while not ruling out abduction. A police artist created a drawing of a, quote, mystery man, but authorities declined to release it at the time, citing uncertainty about whether it was even an accurate likeness of the mystery man. The description in early reporting centered around a man wearing a baseball cap and driving a dark blue car who had asked for directions to 86th Street and Hickman Road. That same man had reportedly asked two boys separately for directions to that same location. In the same reporting, the timeline tightened around the moment that Johnny Gosch's family finally realized that Johnny was missing. One of Johnny's 37 customers called the Gosch home at 7:45 a.m. to ask why the Sunday paper hadn't arrived. Again, this was a customer who was saying that he received his paper daily, on time, every day. So this was out of the ordinary, and this person is on record saying that this was unusual for Johnny, who was reliable and prompt with his paper delivery. So Dad, John Gosch, checked Johnny's room first, finding the bed empty. Then, this is crazy too, the dog by this point had returned home. Remember, the dog went out with Johnny that morning.
And just so I'm clear, we have eyewitnesses that have this guy wearing a baseball cap in a car asking for directions, from multiple paper boys.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another individual. But do we think that there's two individuals, or is it possible that...
That's what gets so confusing about this, the details around when I look at this case, I think we're talking about a window of approximately 30 minutes or so between the time that Johnny arrives to the paper drop-off, rolls up the papers, he's got his wagon ready to go, he's got his bag ready to go, and he sets off on his route. And we know that he only makes it 2 blocks from his home where the wagon is eventually found. But throughout all of these witness statements, and some of these, let's keep in mind, will be secondhand. They'll be told secondhand to Gosch's family, and this is information that they will then put into the public atmosphere.
Right.
This is also information that comes from other sources that say they were told by paper carriers that morning that they saw this or they saw that, or a neighbor saw this or heard that. What you ultimately end up with here, Captain, is potentially 3 individuals that are of question and 2 vehicles. So you have a driver in one vehicle, a driver in another vehicle, and then an individual that's on foot, making it that more difficult to understand and explain the situation.
Right. And again, law enforcement doesn't know which individual these eyewitnesses are talking about. So I think it would be difficult to come up with a composite sketch that you feel confident in.
Yes, and they will eventually release a sketch to the public, and we will go through that information as well. Now, we should note here that if this timeline is accurate to the minute mark, I think it's a very accurate timeline. I just wouldn't nail it down to a specific minute here, but roughly the family saying 7:45 is when they're notified that papers weren't delivered. John Gosch, Johnny's father, finds the wagon, and during the time while police were contacted to come out to the area, John Gosch delivered the undelivered newspapers himself. So if the timeline is correct, this would put the police there taking the report by 8:30 a.m. that morning. Now, keep in mind, it's reported that Johnny Gosch would have left his home just prior to 6 a.m. that morning. So we have a good deal of time. And if it was about a 30-minute window, we have, as I suspect, roughly 2 hours before the police are there and on the scene.
Well, I think what makes this more complicated is, like I said, there's not a lot of individuals out. So did these eyewitnesses see somebody that's involved in this kidnapping, or did they see somebody out for a morning walk or a jog? And then if you're police, you go, well, we have eyewitnesses saying that there's an individual asking for directions. Is he a part of it? Or is there somebody on his route? Because you might only have, let's say, 30 to 100 and some customers, but you might have a route that consists of 200 houses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and throughout this day, this Sunday in September, the search will widen. So eventually we will have involved here the West Des Moines Police Department, the Polk County Sheriff's Department, the Iowa Highway Patrol, and it will go so far as to include off-duty and reserve officers as well. And of course, we have family, friends, and neighbors that will get involved in actively searching the neighborhood and beyond on the Saturday. The day's search ran into rain in the afternoon, complicating the situation. We have volunteers that are soaked. You know, you're out there in the rain, you're looking for a missing boy, and as the minutes turn into hours and the hours go by, you're just building up with a deepening sense of dread. We thought we would find this kid. Maybe we're not going to. And this search continues with a lot of folks involved until dark that Sunday night.
Yeah, I think the thing that's scary for law enforcement and for the community is if there's more than one individual involved, then what are we dealing with?
By Monday, so now day 2 of the search for 12-year-old Johnny Gosch, we get thousands of volunteers, but 0 answers. So this is Labor Day, Monday, September 6, 1982, when the search intensified. More than 1,000 volunteers combed woods, parks, fields, and ditches around West Des Moines. Search lines formed with people spaced out about 5 feet apart, moving through wet grass and brush, looking for anything. A newspaper bag, the shoes or flip-flops, clothing, any trace that could say where Johnny Gosch had gone. Others drove slowly along rural roads in Polk County and Dallas counties, scanning ditches and roadside edges. Still more volunteers cruised nearby highways. At South Woods Park, searchers moved through gnats and mosquitoes, having to deal with that. And at one point, there were some items that prompted calls to authorities. One was a Kleenex, and the other was a set of footprints. But these findings, while they, increase the level of uncertainty, these seem to not produce any leads, and neither of these have ever been described as evidence, just things that were found during the search. So
Right.
unfortunately, we're left with authorities having found no clues. And then once again on day 2, the search is called off at dark. This circles back to some of the statements by witnesses or potential witnesses, as well as what law enforcement is describing the case. So officials publicly, on the record, they describe the case in careful terms. Let's say that. Careful terms, I think, is accurate. They said that there's no clear indications of a kidnapping. So no evidence, no actual evidence that there was a kidnapping. They're also saying there's no evidence or great reason to suspect that Johnny had run away.
Right.
Now, what they were clear on here, Captain, is they are looking for the vehicles and the people seen near the time Johnny vanished. All right. So the dark blue car connected to the man asking for directions, and also a silver late model Ford Fairmont described as having a wide black stripe on it. Police said they wanted to speak to the drivers because they might have witnessed something, even stating publicly that they were not necessarily treating them as suspect vehicles, simply witness vehicles. As the official investigation continued, anxiety spread through the community's families. Parents of other paper carriers talked about their children no longer going out alone on their routes. District circulation managers called carriers and their parents, calling the carriers' parents with warnings saying, you got to be cautious. Do not get into any cars. If something feels strange, go to a customer's door and knock on the door and tell the customer to notify the authorities. So this disappearance very quickly changed the emotional map of a place that had assumed that those early morning hours were safe.
Well, we have evidence of that. We have a driver asking kids for directions and multiple kids trying to give that individual directions.
Yeah, well, let's get into that description there. And I think after all this time, we got to say suspect description here, right?
Yeah, well, I was going to say it's laughable when it's like the Delphi case. Well, we're not saying the guy on the bridge is a suspect, but we'd love to talk to him. And that's what we hear in all these cases. Like,
that's true. But within the first 48, 72, and even I would say even, the first 48 to 72 hours, even the first week, there is some strategy involved in that statement, because what you're hoping, and it wouldn't be the first time, it's rare, but it wouldn't be the first time that you publicly announce, hey, a person that looks like this or a vehicle that looks like that was seen in the area at the time in question. We want to know what that person may have seen or heard, if they have further information that might help us find this person or find the offender. And in some cases, the actual offender will come forward with the belief that they can get in front of it,
right,
and give you some kind of story, and also it may put a little paranoia on that individual, thinking, "Oh, I was seen there. It's only a matter of time before they figure out it was me. I better get there and tell them why I was there and what." Make up something that I saw, or I was there, but I didn't see anything. And in fact, we know that in the Delphi case, Richard Allen, who would later be convicted of those murders, did come forward and talk to somebody saying that he was there that day, but didn't see really anything going on.
Right.
This portion, though, also, don't let it be lost on you, garage friends. Read between the lines. There's a bit of a theory of coordination here in this abduction, right? So over time, the case developed additional public details, including a composite sketch that we've discussed briefly, a suspect description later released to the public. The suspect was described as a man around 5'9" tall, approximately 175 pounds, with dark eyes, black eyebrows, black hair, combed back, a black mustache, appearing to be in his mid-40s, with a heavy beard or unshaven appearance. Okay, now keep in mind, it's still not light out when this witness sees this and is giving this description later, and is giving this description of saying, I saw this person at a distance.
Right.
So where the heavy beard to unshaven appearance sounds strange to me, I don't think they were able to fully articulate 100% what they remember seeing, as far as when they, was it a beard, or was he just look like he didn't shave for a couple days? Many of the descriptions also include this, saying that it possibly of Latin appearance. The vehicle often associated with this individual is described as a two-tone blue mid-size car, potentially a 1979 to 81 model, that is described as clean on the outside, possibly clean interior, and an Iowa license plate. Here's where things get a little twisted. And it might be twisted for a good reason and in the right direction. It's hard to say. When we sit here all these years later with so many questions, hard to say. Noreen Gosch, Johnny's mother, later would publicly describe what she said witnesses tell her that they saw at the paper drop-off.
Right.
She says that a driver pulls up, shuts off his engine. So keep in mind, there would be multiple paper carriers here. From all the descriptions I read, it sounds like there were about 3 boys here, maybe 2 at this spot. But as she tells it, the driver pulls up, shuts off the engine to the vehicle, opens up the passenger door, and started having a conversation asking for directions. And her retelling, she says that Johnny turned to one of the other carriers, another boy, and said that he was afraid. He said that he was done loading his papers and he was going to get out of there, and he might even head back home. So Johnny leaves, as Noreen said. She says that about the same time the driver pulled out too, but not before a detail that she says stuck in her mind as extremely significant. She says that the driver, before driving off, he flicked the dome light 3 times before driving away. So you can typically reach up and there's a switch where you could set the dome light to be on, off, or when the car door opens, would trigger it to turn on. And she is saying that one of the witnesses has told her that the man reached up and, using the switch, flicked the dome light to the vehicle on and off 3 times.
But what does that mean?
It's hard to say. And again, if you want to look at this and read between the lines of a possible coordinated abduction, this obviously would be some kind of signal or trigger to somebody.
Right. Or is it possible that, like you said, there's multiple settings, and if they turned on their light for some reason and then they scroll back, or not scroll back, but they flip back to make it only open when the door, does it flicker in between?
Well, and yeah, the other thing too is oftentimes,
leave it to me to get hung up on something that might not be much of a big deal at all.
Well, no. I think it's fair. I think where someone could point to that and say, well, this man clearly was signaling somebody. And when given Noreen's description, it absolutely sounds that way. And she could be absolutely right. I want to be clear about that. But I cannot tell you how many times I've reached up to turn that dome light on and I turn it off, you know, or I go to turn it on and I turn it to the open setting where the car door would trigger it, or I go to turn it off and I turn it to open and the back on. You know, you can't. The thing is, when that light is not on, and you don't really know, the switch is little, especially in those old cars. That age of vehicle, 79 to 81 model, it would be common for somebody to turn the switch multiple times before getting it to the actual setting that they want.
But also, sometimes the switch isn't not on the light. It's
near the wheel somewhere. The
The
other thing, let's throw another wrench in this whole portion of the story. Some of the witness descriptions of this man remember, he's asking for directions, and he asked more than one individual for directions. So some of these descriptions, not all, say that the man his speech was slurred. So there are some police officers that believe that this guy was just a drunk driver that was probably actually lost and looking for some direction to get where he needed to go.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It does make some sense, but then when you want to, the flip side of that coin is the officers that are suspicious of this vehicle because, well, we gave out the description of the vehicle and the man, and he never came forward to talk to us to tell us if he saw anything. So this is a very difficult case, obviously.
Yeah, but hold on a second. If he was drunk driving, he might not come forward for that reason.
True, but I would hope that in a situation this severe that you'd be willing to go, we appreciate you coming forward.
Right.
Do not drink and drive anymore. I think it would be a little despicable if they're like, all right, well, you just confessed to. He also doesn't have to confess to drinking and driving to come forward, right? I was out driving that night. Oh, that kid said I slurred my speech. What does that kid know?
Yeah.
He didn't have to include that part if it was part of it. Okay. So like we said, this detail with many others in the Johnny Gosch case can be argued and theorized a number of different ways. And of course, Noreen has said publicly for a long time, she believes her view of this is that this was some kind of signal. The dome light action was a signal to someone watching nearby, someone who then later grabbed Johnny, because we know he walked away from this location unharmed, alive and well. Now, she also described that one paperboy reportedly saw a tall man step out from between two houses and then follow behind Johnny. Now, police at the time described in one account, this is by West Des Moines Police Lieutenant Miller. So he's actually a rookie at this time, but later he's on record regurgitating this portion of the story once he reaches lieutenant years later.
Right.
He's saying, we called in for additional help. We did canvassing. We went door to door. We went searching for witnesses. And he said, we just kept running into dead ends. For all the manpower and urgency, no one found Johnny Gosch. And along those years, sightings, investigators, and public pressure were mounting. In the months and years that followed, the story did not end. Noreen Gosch stated that a few months after the disappearance, that Johnny was allegedly seen in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And she describes this disturbing incident in which a boy repeatedly yelled to a woman for help before being dragged away by two men. The case also drew the attention of private investigators who worked with the Gosch family. Among those who assisted Johnny's parents were Jim Rothstein, who is described as a retired New York City police detective, and Ted Gunderson, described as a retired chief of the FBI's Los Angeles field office. Now, this mother's grief would turn to advocacy and a mission. Just 1 month after Johnny's disappearance, Noreen Gosch founded the Johnny Gosch Foundation and developed a program called In Defense of Children. The work grew into a national campaign. She toured widely, making nearly 1,000 personal appearances, often alongside law enforcement, missing persons organizations, and groups concerned with human trafficking. She pressed a message that came from the most personal source possible. Children could vanish quickly, even in, quote, safe places, and systems were needed to respond immediately. And this circles back to the problem with, hey, at this time period, a person isn't missing, a kid isn't missing until it's been 72 hours. So then in October of 1982, President Ronald Reagan signed the Missing Children's Act, described as an effort to address the tragedy of missing children and reassure parents that every effort would be made to find them. In this story and in others, the environment of the early 1980s was simple. I mean, in many cases, there's no national headlines. In many cases, there's no national hotlines, tip lines to call, no Amber Alerts, no rapid deployment infrastructure, no DNA databases. The resources that we have today and the things that have been put in place since kids like Johnny went missing have grown over the years only to the betterment of locating the child or locating the reason why they didn't come home. As the years went on, the public visibility of Johnny's case grew. In 1984, Johnny Gosch's photograph appeared on milk cartons produced by the Des Moines-based Anderson Erickson Dairy Company. His picture was placed alongside the photo of another Des Moines Register paperboy, who we will discuss in this series. His name is Eugene Martin, who went missing in 1984. Johnny was among the first missing children to have a disappearance publicized in that manner. The image traveling into kitchens and grocery stores, an everyday reminder that the boy had not been located.
People often wonder why a case resonates with the nation and why other cases don't. But it's simple in this case. Most people had a paperboy, so most people can relate something to this case. And if you can relate something to the case in your own life, it becomes more important to.
Well, and we've reviewed a lot of these cases, and what we typically see is there's many different avenues that a grieving parent can go down when they are dealing with this situation, this very unfortunate scenario.
Right.
And some of them go heavy into mission-oriented or advocacy. And in that regard, Noreen Gosch is one hell of a force. And that's also a reason why Johnny Gosch's case is so publicized and so remembered and still being discussed in places like the Garage here today. In fact, I mean, this is just another part of her actions. In July of 1984, she authored a bill. The Johnny Gosch bill was passed into Iowa law. It mandated immediate police involvement whenever a child went missing. And according to the report, the approach was subsequently adopted by 8 additional states. That same year, 1984, Noreen Gosch traveled to Washington, D.C. and testified before Congress. She later stated that her testimony led to her receiving death threats.
How does that make any sense?
Well, she was on the forefront of people talking about human trafficking and something that is difficult to understand today and nearly impossible to understand in the early 80s. So she's saying that led to death threats. I don't think that that's people, typical mom and dad in the public calling her up or sending a death threat saying, hey, you better shut your mouth. I think what she's saying without saying it is people that are involved in this, criminals that are involved in things like this, were the types that were threatening her. And that's her way of pointing out there's more people potentially involved in these sort of activities than anybody in the public, even people in law enforcement, may be aware of. And keep in mind, her actions and her loud mouth, and I want to be clear, I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean that as if everybody could have a bullhorn that have had to face supreme difficulty like this or unimaginable tragedy, if everybody had a bullhorn and everybody and people opened up their earballs, open up your ear holes, everyone.
Yeah.
It's her actions that, we talk about the Walshes and so many other people, but it wasn't the Walshes just alone. It was people like Noreen Gosch that helped to eventually establish the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, as we often say here in the Garage. And a big part of that too was President Reagan opening up his ear holes and listening to these parents that were saying, look, in my area, we have a problem. My kid's not the only one. Look at what's happened in Florida, what happened here in Iowa, what happened in California, Texas. And suddenly you realize these are not all just one-offs. These are unfortunately not unique situations. In the 70s and the early 80s, the child abduction rates, especially what is stranger on stranger crimes, the rates were much higher back then.
Yeah, what I was going to say is these aren't one of one. These crimes aren't one of one, but these criminals are not one of one. I think you could take it a step further. It's like, yeah, Dahmer is a unique serial killer, but there's thousands of them. When you think of these kidnappers or human traffickers, they're not one of one. It's not a rare situation. If this is happening in this state, this is happening in every state. So how many of these sick individuals are out there, and how many of them are working together?
Yes, and if it can happen in Los Angeles, California, it can happen in Des Moines, Iowa. And look, a lot of this you will see how these actions in these communities and these parents coming together with community leaders will change future cases that are similar. So in October of 1982, President Ronald Reagan signed the Missing Children Act. This is an effort to address the tragedy of missing children and reassure parents that every effort would be made to find them. Okay, so we've already mentioned that, but what it directly means is that the FBI would expand to becoming more involved in local homicide cases, local abduction cases, missing persons cases. It wouldn't just be when they are called in because a ransom demand or state lines were crossed.
Right.
The case file details here before we wrap, Captain, at the time of his disappearance. Now, of course, this is over 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But Johnny was described as a Caucasian male with brown hair and blue eyes, approximately 67 inches tall, which would be 5'7" tall, and about 140 pounds at the time that he disappeared. I want to point out something here that is noteworthy, and I think it adds to the credibility of the possible suspect composite and description that we discussed earlier. One of the witnesses that provided details about that composite, that helped put that composite together and the description of that person together, simply stated that even from a distance, I'm basing the height and weight of the individual off of Johnny's, because Johnny was standing near this person. And he said that the guy was slightly bigger than Johnny was, slightly taller, slightly heavier than Johnny was. So that's very helpful for the description there.
Yeah, but this makes it difficult too, because if we don't have a solid age range, then you could go, well, this guy could have been in his late teens.
Correct, but this witness is saying that he believed the individual to be in his 40s. Now, regarding Johnny, marks noted for identification purposes include a birthmark on his left cheek and a horseshoe-shaped scar on his tongue. The last confirmed date he was seen, of course, was September 5th, 1982. The investigation began with the West Des Moines Police Department and later involved the FBI. Dental records were made available and entered into databases. The familial DNA samples were submitted and are available for possible future identification. In later commentary, John Walsh, the longtime host of America's Most Wanted and father of Adam Walsh, is quoted reflecting on the Johnny Gosch case and the lack of resolution, saying, "No body, no suspects, no clear answers. Very sad." He stated his belief that a serial pedophile kidnapper may have been active in the area at that time. And he also emphasized the cruelty of uncertainty, saying, quote, "Not knowing is the worst part for families." The disappearance did not only remove a child from a household, it reshaped the household that remained. The long strain on the Gosch family resulted in Noreen and John eventually divorcing. They have both expressed differing feelings, opinions, and theories about the case publicly since their boy was lost. The story of missing paperboy Johnny Gosch does not end, but This is what the terrifying story leaves us with. Online, as iowacoldcase.org describes it, the Gosch missing persons case, it's a story that shocked communities and catapulted Iowa into the national spotlight. It changed state law and forever changed why parents monitored their children's activities and how they did so. Where the story leaves off, Johnny Gosch went missing September of 1982, delivering newspapers. A good timeline, the best we could put together, about 5:45 a.m., Johnny leaves his home in West Des Moines with his dog, Gretchen, and a red wagon to deliver the Des Moines Register Sunday edition. 6 a.m., he meets another paperboy at a drop-off point near the Valley United Methodist Church. This is at 42nd and Ashworth to sort bundles of papers. The final sighting, witnesses report seeing Johnny talking to a man in a blue two-tone car, and a silver car is also noted by another witness. And this would be shortly after, just prior to leaving the meetup spot and shortly after leaving the meetup spot. And as we said, after 7 a.m., it's when calls start going to the Gosch home about undelivered newspapers. How the story stands today, way back in 1982, Johnny Gosch's red wagon was found abandoned with newspapers still in it, untouched. Witnesses described a man in a blue car asking for directions, a possible second follower, and a vehicle speeding away. Massive searches and multiple agencies produced no definitive break in the case. The case has become a catalyst for policy changes and child safety advocacy, but did not deliver the one thing the family and the community needed the most: proof of what happened to Johnny Gosch and where he went after those last confirmed moments at that paper drop-off near the start of his route. Despite all of the extensive physical searches and interviews, the investigation produced little physical evidence and no suspects were arrested in connection with Johnny's disappearance. The case quickly became not only a family tragedy, but a community tragedy. And for many, a 12-year-old paperboy frozen in time. Then as years passed, the Johnny Gosch disappearance became a national reference point. And now, today, it's a cold case, one that is of the most haunting kind.
I want to thank everybody for joining us here in the garage each and every week. So much more to get to in this series. Stick around, and until then,
be good, be kind.